The desert ground was dry and cracked under the burning sun. Heat waves rose in the air, and the crowd gathered in a wide circle. Dust lifted with every heavy step as villagers moved closer to see the punishment. Their voices were sharp, mixed with anger and judgment. In the center of the circle, an alien girl was forced to kneel. Her hands were tied, her eyes filled with tears, but she did not cry loudly. She knew begging would not save her. Her people had already decided her fate. She was declared sterile, useless for giving life, and in her cruel culture, that was a sin greater than theft or even murder. Men with strong arms pushed her down, scooping sand with shovels. She gasped as the ground closed around her body. First, her legs disappeared, then her waist, then her chest. They left only her neck and head above the surface. Her long hair stuck to her sweaty face, and every breath felt heavier. She wanted to scream, but her throat was dry. The sand was hot, biting her skin like fire. She could feel sharp stones pressing against her ribs under the soil. Every second felt like an endless fight to breathe. The villagers laughed cruelly. Children whispered in fear, hiding behind their mothers, while elders nodded with cold approval. For them, this punishment was tradition. A woman who could not give children was not a woman at all. She was a curse, a waste, and the earth itself must swallow her. That was the law written long ago, and no one dared to question it. Her lips trembled as she whispered for mercy, but no one listened. Time moved slowly. The sun climbed higher, burning her skin. Sweat mixed with sand, turning into mud that stuck to her face. Her throat begged for water, but none was given. Her heart pounded fast. Her breath came shallow. Each inhale dragged more dust into her lungs. She felt herself slipping toward darkness. But fear kept her awake. Her eyes darted around the circle, looking for one kind face, one hand that might reach out. She found none. The silence of the crowd was broken only by the buzzing of insects and the mocking laughs of the men. They were proud of their cruelty. They wanted the young to see and remember. This was their way of keeping order, their way of controlling life. If one broke the law, many would watch her suffer. The girl shivered even under the blazing sun. She had never felt so alone, so unwanted, so forgotten. Her mind wandered to her childhood. She remembered running barefoot on green grass, her mother's laughter, the smell of bread from the oven. Now those memories stabbed her heart like knives. She would never go back. Her mother was gone. Her father had turned away, her friends silent in the crowd. She realized no one here would mourn her. They would walk away when her body stopped moving, leaving the desert to finish what they started. The sand pressed tighter around her ribs. Breathing hurt. She tried to wiggle her fingers under the soil, but they were trapped. Even her heartbeat felt heavy, like the earth was crushing it. Her lips cracked, her tongue dry like leather. She whispered again, but her voice was too soft, carried away by the hot wind. Still, her eyes fought to stay open. She wanted to see the sky one last time, even if the sun burned them. The punishment ground was a place of death, but it was also a stage. People came to watch, to gossip, to enjoy another's misery. Some stood with folded arms, some chewed on dried fruit, and some pointed at her like she was an animal in a cage. The ground beneath her smelled of dust and sweat, a cruel mix of life and death. Hours felt like days. Her head hung lower, her eyes half closed. Darkness slowly crept into her vision, but she fought it. Somewhere inside, a small spark of hope refused to die. Maybe someone, anyone, would feel pity. Maybe a stranger would appear. She held that thought close, though it seemed foolish. Her breath rattled, slow and painful. And then, in the distance, footsteps echoed against the desert ground, heavy, steady, unlike the shuffling feet of the villagers. Her ears caught the sound, though her mind was dizzy. The crowd turned slightly, murmuring. A figure approached from far away, tall and broad, dust rising at his heels. The villagers muttered in annoyance. Outsiders rarely came here, and when they did, they never interfered. The girl blinked, trying to focus. Through the blur of heat, she saw the outline of a man. He walked with purpose, his shadow stretching long across the sand. Her heart skipped, unsure if this was real or a dream made by her dying mind. The villagers stared, some smirking, some frowning. They expected him to pass, to ignore, to keep walking like all others did. No one interfered with the law of this land. But he did not pass. He stopped at the edge of the circle, his gaze fixed on the girl buried in the earth. The sun burned his face, but his eyes did not move away. For a moment, silence wrapped the ground. The villagers looked at him with curiosity, waiting to see what he would do. The girl's weak eyes lifted, locking with his. A spark of life flickered in her chest, as if the simple act of being seen had given her strength again. Her lips trembled, no voice came out, but her eyes begged louder than words. The man's jaw tightened, his fists curled. The villagers sensed something dangerous, something defiant in his presence. The punishment ground, once filled with cruel laughter, now held a new tension. The sun still blazed, the sand still burned, but everything had shifted. For the first time, the girl felt she was not completely alone. Someone had stopped. Someone had noticed. Would he walk away like all others, or would he challenge the cruelty of this place? The answer hung heavy in the scorching air, waiting to be revealed. The man stood at the edge of the circle, his eyes fixed on the girl buried in the ground. His heart pounded as he looked at her face, pale and covered in sweat, her lips cracked and trembling. He had seen pain before, but never something this cruel. He was a widowed father, carrying the weight of his own sorrow. His wife had died years ago, leaving him alone to raise his young daughter. Since then, he had lived quietly, working hard to give his child a safe home. He never planned to get involved in the affairs of strangers. But now, as he looked at the girl struggling to breathe, something inside him refused to let him walk away. The villagers stared at him with suspicion. One of the elders, his voice sharp like a blade, shouted, "Stranger, this is not your concern. Walk on." Others joined in, their faces filled with scorn. "This is our law. She has broken it. Do not interfere." Their voices mixed into a harsh chorus, echoing across the barren land. The man did not answer at first. His eyes went to his daughter, standing close behind him. She was small, her hand clutching the edge of his shirt. Fear shone in her wide eyes. She whispered, "Papa, why are they doing this to her?" He had no answer. He only knew he could not allow his daughter to believe cruelty was the same as justice. He stepped closer, his boots pressing into the sand. The crowd shifted uneasily. A few men spat at the ground, warning him to stop. But his mind was already made up. The sight of the girl's head barely above the sand burned into him. She reminded him of the nights he had watched his wife fade away in sickness, helpless to save her. He could not save his wife, but maybe he could save this stranger. His voice finally broke the tense silence. "This is not justice," he said, his tone steady but heavy with anger. "This is murder." The villagers erupted. Some shouted insults, others laughed mockingly. "Murder? She is already dead to us," one cried. "Go back to your world, human," another sneered. "This is our way, not yours." But their rage did not shake him. Instead, he bent down and pressed his hands into the sand. It was burning hot, searing his skin, but he pushed deeper. He began to dig with his bare hands. The girl blinked weakly, her eyes widening in shock. She had thought no one would ever help her, that no one would dare. The man's rough hands scraped through the soil around her shoulders. Each handful of dirt he pulled away made the crowd shout louder. But he did not stop. His breath grew heavier. Sweat rolled down his forehead, yet his hands moved faster. Every scoop of sand was a battle against time. The girl coughed, her throat too dry to speak, but her eyes filled with tears. She tried to whisper, but no sound came out. Still, he understood. She was asking why. Why would a stranger risk himself for her? He thought of his daughter again. He thought of the world she would grow up in. If he walked away now, what lesson would she learn? That the weak deserved to die? That silence was safer than compassion? He could not let that be her truth. The elder stepped forward, his staff striking the ground. "Enough," he barked. "Leave her or suffer the punishment yourself." The man looked up briefly, his face set like stone. "If that's the price," he said, his voice low but firm, "then so be it." Gasps rippled through the crowd. No outsider had ever defied their law. No one had ever dared. His daughter dropped to her knees beside him, her small hands digging clumsily into the sand. "Papa, I'll help," she whispered, her voice trembling but determined. He glanced at her, pride and fear twisting inside him, and nodded. Together they worked, father and daughter, against the weight of tradition, against the scorn of an entire village. The villagers shouted louder, some demanding violence, others urging the man to stop before it was too late. Yet none stepped forward to drag him away. There was something in his eyes that unsettled them. A fire, a rage, a promise that if they touched him or his daughter, he would not break easily. The girl buried in the sand felt the weight on her chest lessen as the soil shifted away. Air rushed into her lungs more freely. For the first time since the punishment began, hope flickered inside her. Her tears cut lines through the dust on her cheeks, her lips forming silent words of gratitude. The man's hands were raw, his fingers bleeding from scraping against sharp stones. But he ignored the pain. Every cut, every drop of blood only hardened his resolve. He had lost enough in his life. He would not lose this battle, not while breath remained in his body. Finally, he pulled enough sand from around her shoulders that her chest could rise fully. She gasped, her lungs sucking in air desperately. Her head tilted back, eyes closing in relief. The villagers grew restless, their murmurs dark and angry. They realized he was close to freeing her completely. If he succeeded, it would be a direct insult to their law, a challenge to their authority. The elder's face twisted with fury. "You bring doom on yourself, human. You bring doom on your child." But the man ignored him. He looked once more at his daughter, her face smeared with dirt but glowing with determination. Then he looked at the alien girl, half buried but alive. His heart spoke louder than the crowd. He whispered under his breath, almost like a vow, "Not today. Not while I'm here." And with that, he dug deeper, faster, his hands moving like a man possessed. The crowd's shouts blurred into the background. All he could hear was the ragged breathing of the girl he was trying to save, and the small, steady voice of his daughter beside him, whispering encouragement. The punishment ground, once a place of despair, had become a battlefield of wills. Tradition against compassion, law against humanity. And for the first time in many years, the man felt alive, not because he wanted to fight, but because he had found something worth fighting for. The man's fingers tore through the sand like claws, every movement desperate, every breath rough with effort. The sun pressed down on his back, making sweat pour from his forehead into his eyes. The earth was hot and heavy, sticking to his skin, burning the cuts on his hands. Yet he did not stop. His daughter crouched beside him, her small hands scooping sand with trembling determination. Together they worked, father and child, against the will of an entire village. The alien girl coughed weakly, her head swaying as if she might fall forward any moment. Her lips moved, whispering sounds that barely existed, a broken attempt at speech. The man leaned closer, his hands still digging, and caught only fragments. Pleas for water, for mercy, for life. His chest tightened. He could not let her voice be silenced here, not like this. Each cough reminded him that time was against them. The crowd's noise grew louder. The villagers had gathered closer, their feet stirring the sand into angry little clouds. They shouted warnings, threats, insults. "Stop this madness," one man cried. "She is cursed," shouted another. Some laughed, eager to see him fail, while others spat into the dirt. But none stepped forward to drag him away. Something about his unshakable focus made them uneasy. They could see in his eyes that he would fight them all if he had to. The girl's chest rose only shallowly. Her body was trembling, her face pale under the crust of sweat and dust. Her eyelids fluttered, her vision dimming. The man dug faster, his nails breaking, leaving streaks of blood in the sand. He ignored the sting. Each handful of soil removed from around her ribs meant she could take a little deeper breath. He spoke to her, even though she could barely hear. "Stay awake, just a little longer. I'm here." His daughter tugged at his arm, her own cheek streaked with dirt. "Papa, she's so cold," she whispered. He touched the girl's exposed shoulder, and indeed her skin was cool despite the punishing heat of the sun. The sand was stealing her life, draining her strength. He gritted his teeth and tore harder into the earth, his muscles aching with each pull. The girl's eyes fluttered open for a second, meeting his. In that gaze, faint but burning with a question, he saw disbelief. Why would a stranger do this? Why risk his own safety for someone cast out and condemned? He had no answer that could be spoken aloud, but his hands told her the truth, because he could not stand by and watch. Because he had lost too much already. Because saving her meant saving a part of himself. The villagers began to stir more aggressively. A few picked up stones, testing the weight in their hands. Their angry mutters grew darker. They did not want their law broken in front of them. They did not want a human to shame them by undoing their judgment. One man stepped forward, but the elder raised his hand and stopped him. His sharp eyes stayed locked on the man digging. The elder wanted to see how far he would go, how much he would risk. The man's arms ached, but he pushed the pain away. He thought of his wife's face on her deathbed, pale and tired, slipping away while he held her hand. He had been powerless then. Now, though, he had strength in his arms and will in his heart. He would not let this girl slip into death. Not while his hands could still move. Grains of sand slid away faster as he carved deeper around her waist. The girl coughed again, this time stronger, her chest rising a little more freely. His daughter clapped her hands softly, her eyes bright with hope. "She's breathing better, Papa," she whispered. Her small voice gave him more strength than any roar of battle. He nodded and dug faster. But the crowd's patience snapped. "Enough!" a villager shouted. Stones rattled in hands, feet stomped. The man lifted his head, his eyes flashing with warning. He stood tall for a moment, his body shielding the girl and his daughter. His voice, low and steady, carried across the circle. "You will not touch her. If you try, you'll have to go through me." The words cut the air like steel. For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy. Even the wind seemed to pause. The elder scowled but did not move. The villagers growled, restless, but none dared take the first step. His stance, his fury, his promise of violence made them hesitate. He turned back and dropped to his knees again, his hands returning to the earth, faster, fiercer. The girl gasped, her lungs finally able to expand fully as her chest was freed from the crushing sand. Tears rolled down her dust-covered face. She tried to form words, but her voice was too broken. Still, she stared at him with something new in her eyes. Not just disbelief, but the fragile spark of hope. His daughter reached out, touching the girl's dirty hand that barely peeked through the soil. "Hold on," she whispered, her small fingers wrapping around the weak ones of the buried woman. That touch seemed to anchor the girl. Her breathing steadied, shallow but stronger. She squeezed back faintly, as if clinging to life itself. The man felt a surge of determination as he saw that connection, his daughter, innocent and pure, offering kindness where an entire village had given only cruelty. He dug with renewed force, his arms a blur despite the fire in his muscles. Sand flew behind him, his knuckles raw and bleeding, but he did not slow. The sun began to sink lower, shadows stretching across the ground. The crowd had grown restless, uneasy. They could no longer laugh at what they saw. They could no longer mock. Instead, they whispered in anger and fear because the impossible was happening before their eyes. A man, a stranger, was undoing their sentence of death. And as the last layers of sand loosened around the girl's waist and hips, the man leaned close to her ear and whispered with grit and promise, "You're not dying here. Not today." The punishment ground trembled with tension, the air thick with the weight of what he had just done. He had challenged their law, stolen their victory, and given life where they had demanded death. The girl was not free yet, but she was alive, and the battle for her soul had just begun. The man rose to his feet, his chest heaving from the effort of digging. His arms were covered in cuts, his hands bleeding and raw, but his eyes burned with unshaken resolve. The alien girl's head rested against the sand, her chest moving a little more freely now that he had cleared so much of the dirt away. She was weak, almost lifeless, yet alive because of him. His daughter still knelt beside her, clutching the girl's trembling hand. For a moment, the father looked at both of them, the girl half buried and his own child who refused to let go. That single sight filled him with something stronger than pain, defiance. Around them, the villagers roared in anger. Their shouts shook the ground, their feet stomping in rhythm like a drum of hatred. "Stop this at once!" one man bellowed. "You dishonor our laws!" cried another. Women pulled their children closer, some whispering prayers, others glaring with scorn. The elder raised his staff high, his wrinkled face twisting with fury. "Human," he thundered. "You dare shame our people? You dare defy the law of our ancestors?" His voice was sharp, like the crack of a whip. The man turned his head slowly, his eyes locking with the elder's. For a long, heavy moment, no sound came from his mouth. The villagers waited, expecting him to cower, to drop to his knees and beg forgiveness. But instead, his voice came out deep and unyielding. "Not today." The words were simple, but they rolled across the circle like thunder. Gasps spread through the crowd. Never had anyone spoken against the law so openly. A few villagers raised stones, gripping them tightly, ready to hurl. Others clenched their fists, itching to drag him away. Yet none moved forward. Something in his voice, something in his stance froze them in place. He was only one man, yet he stood as though 100 warriors stood with him. The elder slammed his staff into the sand. "You have brought ruin upon yourself. This woman is cursed, sterile, unfit for life. She deserves the ground, not your mercy. Do you think you can stand against us all?" His words were filled with venom, his eyes daring the man to challenge him further. The widowed father straightened his shoulders, his body a shield between the villagers and the girl. His daughter tugged at his sleeve, whispering with fear, "Papa, they're angry." He looked down at her, then brushed her hair gently with his bloody fingers. His voice softened only for her. "Hold her hand. Don't let go, no matter what happens." The little girl nodded, her small jaw tightening with surprising courage. She clung tighter to the buried girl's hand, refusing to be moved. The villagers began to press closer, a ring of bodies tightening around them. Dust rose as sandals scraped the ground. Shouts filled the air. "Drag him away! Stone them all! Show the human our law cannot be broken." The sound was deafening, a storm of hatred ready to swallow them. But the man did not move. He spread his feet wide, planting himself firmly in the sand. His chest rose and fell, but his gaze was steady. His voice cut through the noise, louder this time. "She is not cursed. She is alive, and as long as I stand here, none of you will touch her." The words rang like steel striking stone. For a heartbeat, the villagers faltered. They were used to obedience, to silence, to fear. No one had ever spoken like this. No one had ever dared challenge the weight of their law. The elder's face darkened, veins rising on his temples. He lifted his staff higher as though to strike, but still he hesitated. The man's eyes held no fear, only a fire that warned of consequences if they came closer. The alien girl, weak and fading, heard his voice above the chaos. Her eyes opened slightly, tears slipping down her dusty cheeks. She had been abandoned by her family, rejected by her people, buried by the very hands that once held her. Yet now this stranger, this human, stood like a wall of iron against them all. Her heart fluttered with something she had never known before: safety. The villagers grew restless. Some argued with each other, uncertain. The law demanded her death, but the sight of the man's defiance unsettled them. He was not one of them, yet he fought as though the girl was his own blood. Some saw foolishness, others saw danger, but a few, just a few, saw something they could not name, something that cracked the certainty of their cruelty. The elder spat into the sand. "Then you will share her fate," he hissed. "The ground will take you too." His words were poison, but his body did not move forward. The villagers shifted nervously, their anger beginning to feel more like fear. The man had not raised a weapon, yet his presence alone was enough to shake them. The widowed father's daughter lifted her chin, her voice small but clear. "She is not cursed," she said, echoing her father's words. "She is like us." Her innocent declaration pierced the crowd like an arrow. Some villagers scoffed, others cursed, but many looked away, ashamed to meet the gaze of a child who spoke the truth. The man bent once more to the sand, his hands returning to the task of digging. Every scoop of earth he pulled away was another act of defiance, another wound to their pride. The villagers shouted louder, but their voices trembled. The elder's staff shook in his hand, fury burning in his eyes, but still he did not strike. The punishment ground, once a place of unquestioned cruelty, now trembled with doubt. As the sun began to dip lower, shadows stretched across the sand. The air was thick with tension, the cries of the crowd clashing against the steady rhythm of the man's digging. He had declared his stance with more than words, with his body, his blood, his unyielding will. And there, under the fiery sky, one truth became clear. He was no longer just saving a dying girl. He was challenging an entire way of life. He was standing against tradition, against fear, against a world that chose cruelty over compassion. The villagers could not yet see it, but history was already shifting beneath their feet. The man's voice broke through once more, quiet but sharp like a blade in the silence. "Not today." And the crowd, for all its rage, could not silence him. The sun slipped lower, painting the desert sky with orange fire, but the punishment ground still burned with tension. The man's hands shook from exhaustion, but he refused to stop. The girl's body was nearly free now. The sand clung stubbornly around her hips and legs, yet her chest rose and fell with deeper breaths than before. She was alive, clinging to life by the thinnest thread, and that was enough for him to keep digging. His daughter stayed close, her tiny fingers still holding the alien girl's cold, trembling hand, whispering softly, "It's okay. You're safe." The villagers could not take it anymore. Their patience broke like a thin rope snapping under pressure. Anger exploded in shouts and curses. Some men lifted stones high above their heads. Others grabbed sticks and rusted tools. The elder raised his staff and bellowed, "Seize them! If he wants to share her fate, then let the earth swallow him too." The crowd surged forward, their faces twisted with hatred. The man spun around quickly, standing tall in front of his daughter and the half-buried girl. His chest rose and fell like a storm, his eyes blazing. "Stay back," he roared, his voice deep and filled with a force that startled even the boldest villager. For a heartbeat, they stopped, unsettled by the fire in his words. But fury soon drowned their hesitation. They stepped closer, growling, their shadows stretching long in the dying light. The man knew they would not stop. He had only two choices: abandon the girl and leave, or fight. But he had already chosen long ago when he first put his hands in the sand. His heart beat faster, but his mind was sharp. He could not fight an entire village with just his fists, not while protecting his daughter and the girl. He needed another way. He bent down quickly, scooping the last handfuls of sand from around the girl's waist, then yanked her weak body into his arms. She gasped, coughing, her head falling against his chest. She was light, too light, her body frail from suffering. He shifted her carefully and turned to his daughter. "Hold on to my belt. Don't let go," he ordered firmly. The little girl nodded, her eyes wide but brave. She gripped him tightly, pressing close against his leg. The villagers moved in closer, blocking the circle's edge. Their angry cries filled the air, echoing against the hard desert rocks. The elder pointed his staff, his voice sharp as a knife. "Do not let them leave." The ring closed, and for a moment it seemed like there was no escape. But the man had lived through loss, through war, through hunger. He knew survival better than they did. His eyes darted around quickly, searching. Then he saw it. A gap between two large men, narrow, but enough to push through if he was fast. Without a second thought, he lowered his head and charged forward. The crowd roared in shock as he slammed his shoulder into one man's chest, knocking him aside. The girl in his arms groaned weakly, but he held her tight, protecting her fragile body. His daughter clung to his belt, stumbling but keeping up. Angry hands reached for him. Stones flew past, one grazing his back, but he pushed harder, faster. He did not stop to look back. The villagers gave chase, shouting, their feet pounding the ground like a stampede. Dust rose in thick clouds as the man ran across the dry earth. His heart thundered, every muscle screaming with pain, but he refused to slow down. The girl's shallow breaths against his chest reminded him of what was at stake. If he stumbled now, she would be lost. The desert stretched endlessly, but he knew its paths better than they did. He had traveled far with his daughter before, carrying supplies and running from dangers. He cut across uneven ground, heading for the darker outline of trees in the distance. If they could reach the forest, the night would hide them. Behind him, voices still shouted. The villagers had torches now, flames flickering in the evening wind. They cursed him, cursed the girl, cursed his defiance. But their anger only fed his determination. He tightened his grip around the girl, whispering into her ear though she was barely conscious. "Stay with me. Just stay with me." The chase tore through the rocky terrain. His daughter stumbled once, nearly falling, but he scooped her up onto his other arm without slowing, the girl still in his grasp. His body ached under the double weight, but his will was iron. He would carry them both until his legs broke if he had to. At last, the first shadows of the forest wrapped around them. Branches cracked under his boots, leaves brushed against his face. The darkness welcomed him, swallowing the light of the villagers' torches behind him. Their shouts grew fainter, their footsteps lost among the trees. He slowed only when silence began to replace the noise of pursuit. Breathing heavily, he dropped to one knee, carefully setting his daughter down. The alien girl still lay limp in his arms, her breaths shallow, her body trembling. His daughter touched her cheek gently. "Papa, she's burning up," she whispered, tears shining in her eyes. The man brushed the girl's dusty hair back, his face tightening with worry. He had saved her from the sand, but she was still slipping away. He tore a strip of cloth from his shirt, soaked it with the little water from his flask, and pressed it to her lips. Drops rolled into her mouth, and she coughed, swallowing weakly. Her eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, hazy and lost, and she whispered, "Why? Help me?" The man looked at her, his face shadowed in the fading light. His answer came low and steady. "Because no one helped me when I needed it most, and I will not let my daughter grow up in a world where mercy is weakness." The girl's eyes softened, and though she could not speak again, a single tear slipped down her cheek. She closed her eyes, surrendering to exhaustion, but not to death. The man adjusted her in his arms and looked at his daughter. "We can't stop here. They'll keep searching." His daughter nodded, gripping his arm tightly, her face pale but strong. Together, they moved deeper into the forest, shadows wrapping around them like a cloak. Behind them, the village burned with rage. But ahead, through the darkness of the forest, a fragile hope had been born, one that could not be buried so easily. The forest was dark and full of strange sounds. Owls called from hidden branches, and insects buzzed in the heavy night air. The man moved carefully, carrying the alien girl in his arms, while his daughter walked close at his side, clinging to his shirt. Every step was heavy, but he did not stop. The girl's breath was still shallow, her body limp, and he knew she needed warmth, food, and rest soon. He could not let her slip away now, not after risking everything to free her. At last, the thick trees opened, and his small farm came into view. It was simple, an old wooden house, a shed, and fields that stretched out under the moonlight. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney. He had not bothered to light a fire before leaving earlier that day. But now the house seemed like a sanctuary, a safe place far away from the hateful eyes of the villagers. He pushed the door open with his shoulder and stepped inside, the wooden floor creaking under his boots. The air inside was cool and quiet. He laid the girl gently on a bed near the fireplace, brushing dirt and sand from her hair. His daughter hurried to bring blankets, covering the girl carefully. "She's so cold, Papa," she whispered, her eyes wide with worry. The man nodded and pulled more cloth from the shelves, tucking them around the alien girl. Then he lit a fire in the hearth, the flames spreading warmth through the small room. For the first time, the girl seemed to relax. Her breathing eased, her shivering slowed, her eyes opened slightly, weak but clearer than before. She looked around, confusion filling her face. She was no longer in the punishment ground, no longer surrounded by those who hated her. Instead, she saw a simple home, warm light, and two strangers who had chosen to save her. The little girl sat beside her, holding her hand. "You're safe now," she said softly. The alien girl blinked, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak. But no words came out. Instead, tears slid silently down her cheeks. She had never felt kindness from her people, not after they had declared her cursed. And now, from those she had been taught to distrust, a human and his child, she felt something she thought she would never feel again: compassion. The man brought a bowl of water and touched it to her lips. She drank slowly, coughing at first, then swallowing more steadily. He watched carefully, making sure not to let her choke. When she finished, he wiped her mouth with the cloth and said quietly, "You'll live." His voice carried no pride, only relief. The alien girl stared at him, trying to understand. Why would this man, a stranger, risk his life for her? She opened her mouth and finally whispered, her voice hoarse, "Why?" He did not answer right away. Instead, he looked at his daughter, who was still holding the girl's hand tightly. Then he said, "Because no one should be left to die alone." His words struck her heart like a heavy stone. She had been buried, abandoned, forgotten by her own family, her own people. Yet this human, who owed her nothing, had dug her free and brought her here. She turned her head toward the little girl and managed a faint smile. "Thank you," she whispered. The child smiled back brightly. "Papa says kindness is never wasted," she said proudly. The alien girl closed her eyes, her tears falling freely now. She felt weaker than ever. But inside her chest, something new began to stir, a fragile hope. The man rose and checked the door, making sure it was bolted. He knew the villagers would not forget. They would come looking for her, and for him. Their anger would not fade easily. But for now, there was silence, only the crackle of the fire and the soft breathing of the girl he had saved. Hours passed slowly. The alien girl drifted between sleep and waking, sometimes moaning softly, sometimes whispering broken words. Each time, the man or his daughter was there to comfort her, to give her water, or to soothe her fear. She began to realize she was not just rescued, she was being cared for, truly cared for. That was something she had never known, not even as a child. The daughter, curious but gentle, asked questions as she sat beside her. "Do you have a family? Do you have children?" The girl shook her head weakly, her face filled with sorrow. "No, I was not allowed." Her words were filled with pain, and the little girl hugged her arm tightly. "Then you can stay with us," she said without hesitation. "You can be our family." The alien girl's eyes widened, shocked by the simple innocence of the child's offer. She felt her heart ache in ways she could not explain. She turned to the father, searching his face. He did not speak, but the steady look in his eyes told her the truth. She was welcome here. That night, the house became more than a shelter. It became the first place where she had not been judged, where her existence was not a crime. The warmth of the fire wrapped around her like a gentle embrace, and the laughter of the child, small but bright, filled the silence she had lived with for so long. Still, in the shadows of the night, danger waited. The man knew the villagers would not stop until they had her back, buried where they believed she belonged. He sat by the window, a knife resting in his hand, his eyes scanning the dark fields. He was tired, his body broken from digging and carrying, but he would not sleep. Not tonight. He had promised himself he would protect her, and he would not break that promise. The alien girl, half asleep under the blankets, opened her eyes once more. She saw him there, watching over the house like a guard, ready to fight for her if needed. She had never seen anyone stand for her before. And in that moment, though her body was still weak, her spirit felt something powerful. She was no longer alone. As the firelight flickered across the walls, her lips formed words so soft they were almost lost in the night. "I want to live." It was not just a wish, it was a vow. And for the first time, she believed it might be possible. The morning came slowly, a pale light pushing through the cracks of the wooden house. The man was still awake, sitting by the window with tired eyes. His knife rested on the table, his hand never far from it. He had heard noises outside during the night, but nothing had come close. Now, as the sun rose, he knew it was only a matter of time before the villagers found their way here. They would not let go of what he had done. Behind him, the fire had turned to glowing embers. His daughter slept on a blanket near the alien girl, her little arm wrapped protectively around the woman's waist. The girl stirred, her breathing stronger than the night before. When her eyes opened, she looked around, still surprised to find herself alive, still safe inside the man's home. She saw the man watching the fields through the window and felt a strange pull in her heart. No one had ever stood for her. No one had ever fought for her. Yet this stranger had risked everything. The man turned his head when he heard her moving. Their eyes met, and for a long moment no words were spoken. Then she whispered, her voice weak but clear, "They will come for me." He nodded. "I know." His voice was calm, steady, but heavy with truth. He was ready for it. She shook her head, her throat tightening. "You should give me back. If you keep me, they will kill you and your child." At those words, the little girl stirred awake, rubbing her eyes. She sat up quickly and hugged the alien woman's arm. "No, you can't go back. They'll hurt you again." Her small voice trembled, but her grip was strong. "Papa won't let them." The man stood slowly and walked toward them. His eyes softened as he looked at his daughter, then at the woman still wrapped in blankets. "She's right," he said firmly. "You're not going back. If they come here, they'll find I'm not so easy to bury." The alien girl's lips trembled. No one had ever spoken for her like that. She had been treated as worthless, less than dirt, by her people. Now this man, a widower who owed her nothing, stood between her and the entire village. She wanted to protest, to tell him not to risk his life, but her heart refused. A warmth spread in her chest, something stronger than fear. By midday, the sound of angry voices carried across the fields. The villagers had come. Dust rose as dozens of feet marched toward the house. The man saw them from the window, a dark crowd carrying sticks, stones, and torches. The elder was at the front, his staff raised high, his face twisted with rage. The little girl pressed herself against her father's side, holding tightly to his shirt. "Papa," she whispered, fear in her eyes. He knelt beside her and spoke calmly. "Stay inside. Hold her hand. Don't let go." He placed a kiss on her forehead, then rose and stepped to the door. His shoulders were broad, his stance unshaken. He pushed the door open and walked outside. The villagers stopped a few paces away, their anger buzzing like a swarm of bees. The elder pointed his staff at him. "Human, you have broken our law. You have stolen what was condemned. Hand her over, or we will burn your home to the ground." The man's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "No, just that one word. Simple, final." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The elder's face turned red with fury. "You dare defy us all? She is sterile. She has no worth. Why risk your life for her?" The man's jaw tightened and his voice rose, stronger this time. "Because worth is not measured by what she can give. She is alive, and that is enough. She is mine to protect now. If you want her, you'll have to take her over my dead body." The villagers shouted in outrage, but none rushed forward. His stance was unyielding, his eyes blazing with a fire they could not match. He looked like one man, but in that moment, he seemed larger than all of them. Inside the house, the alien girl heard his words. Tears filled her eyes. She had expected to be abandoned again, but instead she heard the sound of someone claiming her life as worth fighting for. Her heart ached, but this time it was not from pain, it was from hope. The elder growled and slammed his staff into the ground. "So be it! You have chosen death!" He raised his hand, signaling the crowd to attack. The villagers surged forward, their voices wild with rage. The man reached for the axe leaning by the doorframe, gripping it with both hands. His muscles were tired, his body sore, but his will was steel. He swung it once in the air, the blade flashing in the sunlight. "Come then!" he shouted. His voice roared across the fields, fierce and fearless. But something unexpected happened. The villagers slowed, some hesitated, their steps faltering. His defiance, his courage, shook them. They were used to obedience, to fear, but this man was different. He had nothing left to lose, and men like that were the most dangerous. The elders shouted at them to continue, but the hesitation spread. One villager dropped his stone, another lowered his stick. Doubt filled their eyes. Was their law truly justice or cruelty disguised as tradition? The sight of the man standing tall against them all made them question what they had believed their whole lives. The alien girl, weak but determined, pulled herself up from the bed with trembling arms. She stumbled to the doorway, her body still fragile, but her voice steady. "Enough!" she cried, surprising even herself. The villagers froze, staring at her. Her voice cracked, but her words carried. "I will not be buried again. If you want me dead, you will have to kill me while I stand beside him and his daughter." Her courage struck like lightning. The crowd fell silent, stunned by the strength in her voice. The man moved to her side instantly, steadying her, his hand on her shoulder. His daughter rushed forward, holding the alien girl's hand tightly. The three of them stood together, a small family forged in defiance. The villagers looked on, unsure, shaken. The elder's face burned with rage, but even he saw the doubt spreading among his people. He slammed his staff down once more, but fewer voices answered him now. Some turned their heads away. Others lowered their weapons. The man's voice broke the silence. "This is my family now." His words carried no fear, only truth. The alien girl leaned against him, her tears falling, but her spirit burning bright. For the first time, she felt alive. For the first time, she had something to fight for. And though the villagers did not step aside that day, the ground beneath their traditions had cracked. The law that had buried her was dying, and a new story had begun. One of defiance, mercy, and an unexpected family that no one could bury again.